Do that again, Joel. Let's see what happens. So we're doing a session on body cameras. Hopefully this is an interactive session. I have a lapel mic on, so worst case, I will unclip it and lean in, and we'll get a real nice personal view of you with this body cam on. But we have a great group of panelists that are going to talk with us today about body cams. Some of them are implementing, some of them are debating, some of them are like absolutely not. We have somebody from the state archives that's going to talk on the records retention side. We have a law enforcement officer from Kernersville, Sergeant, yes, Greg Hyatt. Greg Castle is our Chief Information Officer from Kernersville. Courtney Bailey is from the State Archives Records Retention Division. Jeff Britton is the CIO for Gaston County. You probably know most of them. And what we're going to do is just talk through the issues. How many of you are wrestling with body cams right now? I mean, not physically wrestling with them, right? How many of you are paying attention to the legislation involving body cams? Does everybody understand that the Highway Patrol has already been authorized or required by the current budget to put body cams on the rest of the Highway Patrol this year? And I think they funded it to the tune of, $3 to $4 million for the hardware. I don't know that there's been any consideration of the storage costs associated with that. So we're going to talk through some of those issues. Oakland, California has been doing body cams for a while. They have about 600 officers with body cams. They record the entire shift all day long for every officer that's working. Monthly, they're capturing 7 terabytes of data. Their retention period is 5 years. 420 terabytes of data for 5 years. Oakland County, California is keeping everything for 5 years. 100% of all the recordings. Is anybody considering doing that? Yeah, right? Maybe that is why Google put the barge out there. Seattle, right now, is posting all of their body cam videos on YouTube. Courtney probably was not advised that that is compliant with state law, right? Probably not. So we're going to talk through these issues. I have lots of questions for the panelists that I've set up, but hopefully you have better questions. So as you think of questions to ask, or if you want to talk about what you're doing in your jurisdiction, wave your hand and I will run over to you, hopefully, and not fall down, and let you ask those questions or pose those scenarios that you're dealing with. I'm going to have the panelists just go through real quickly, introduce who they are, and if they're wrestling with whether or not to do body cams, in the case of Jeff Britton, I'll let him speak about that. Currently implemented body cams in Kernersville, and then Courtney's role in terms of figuring out how state law is going to deal with all of these things in terms of retention. We'll start with you, Jeff, if that works. You guys have 2 different mics you can pass back and forth.
Yes, I'm Jeff Britton, I'm CIO for Gaston County. Gaston County is, I think, a little bit of an anomaly. We actually have a Gaston County Police Department. We have the Sheriff's Office, and we're also located in the county seat, which is Gastonia, and they have their own city police department. So within 3 or 4 or 5 blocks in each direction, I can walk to 3 different law enforcement agencies, and they all have different opinions on what that's going to be. The city of Gastonia, Chief Elton down there is very much in favor. He's been doing some testing with that. He's very much in favor of body cams. The Chief Bowie with the Gaston County Police Department is very much against them. And of course, Sheriff Kalaniger is on the fence. So,
good afternoon, everybody. My name is Greg Hyatt. I'm a sergeant with Kernersville Police Department, and I'm currently the in-service training coordinator. I say currently because it's a nightmare job, and who knows when they'll throw me out. So, but we have implemented the program. We're rolling with it. My involvement was pretty much looking at everything policy, procedure-wise, how we're going to roll it out by department. IT guys did all the work, to be honest with you. They did a ton of work on it, and but we are currently using it. And so far, it's been working pretty well. So if you have any questions about that part of it, how it's rolling out for the officers, any complaints, gripes, pluses, anything like that, if they're saying, then feel free to ask me.
So I'm Ray Castle, CIO for Town of Kernersville. We've actually been doing some form of body cams probably for about 5 to 6 years. And that might be a little bit of a surprise, but when we started this, we had some fire department inspectors come to us and say, we're getting complaints from citizens that we aren't doing our job properly, but we are doing our job properly, so we want to wear these little small cameras. So they actually picked out a little small, it's called an MUVI, I think is the name of it. It's a very inexpensive, less than $100 camera. They wore those on their shirt pockets when they would go in and do building inspections. Of course, more recently, with law enforcement, the chief asked us to look at a couple of products, and we did look at some briefly. Taser is probably a leader in the market right now, and it was probably the most convenient for us to go to at that particular time. We looked at something like Digital Ally, we looked at WatchGuard, we looked at some other things, but Taser was obviously the leader there, so that's the ones that we chose. What we really wrestled with was whether or not we could afford to put the video up in a cloud storage. Thank you, Sheila, for liking my photo there.
I hope somebody does anybody know Gray's cell phone number?
Oh, no.
Just start texting really inappropriate things and it'll pop up on there. That's probably a real bad idea, Gray, real bad.
Yeah, so let me tell you what we got here. So she's wearing the camera there. She's wearing the Axon Flex camera, which is a camera mounted on her head there where she can wear it around her collar. She has a battery pack on the side there, and if you notice, it's actually broadcasting. Obviously, it's Bluetooth over to my phone. The device is not recording right now, but if she double taps on the battery pack back there, she gets 2 little beeps in her ear right here. It goes beep beep, she can hear it, and then it should show that it is recording. We chose to not record full shifts. The chief decided that it would be recording when the officer was engaged with the citizen on some professional level, not necessarily just a casual conversation, but if it was during some sort of investigation or information gathering, that's when you would do the recording. So what we did, we went out and got, I think we had 2 of these. We put them on, a couple on day shift for a few weeks, and we put a couple on night shift for a few weeks. And of course, when it's something new, you're going to make a mistake right out of the gate, right? So the first mistake that we came across was a police officer left it running while he went to the restroom. So yeah, it does happen. But again, back to the idea of whether or not we're going to store in the cloud or store locally. We actually added about 10 terabytes to the SAN here. We added slow storage, we added IDE type storage. We looked at a product that we already have, which is Panasonic cameras, our arbitrator system, which is in our cars. We have forward-facing cameras in the car as well as a camera in the back of the car. So we already had a camera storage system in place. So we looked at using that as our storage for our cameras. So what we do is we actually record on the camera. We bring that video to a laptop. They do a download from the camera to the local laptop, and then from that local laptop, it's pushed up to the server. It's pushed up to the server and stored there, and then they do their categorizations. So it's saved in the same place as your car video. It's assigned to an officer, and it has a category there which assigns a retention plan for it. So we did this really for saving money. I mean, we saved enough money that we're not putting into equipment and storage. We can put that back into personnel, and that was important for us. Sure.
So you're using the Taser solution, but you're not storing it in the cloud, you're storing it on a localized server?
That's correct. The Axon Flex camera, and I'm not a salesman for Taser by any means, but there's also a Taser body camera. Either of those can be set in what's called an offline mode. So the offline mode stores the video on the camera itself. And they bring the camera plugged into, the officer plugs it into his laptop via USB, downloads from that camera, and then what we use is our back-end server client to push that data up to our arbitrator, and then we code at that time.
Here, Scott, I'm gonna walk over so they can hear you. His first question was about whether they were using the Taser appliance versus the Taser storage?
About 2 weeks ago, I sat in on basically an information output from Taser. And they were saying they were moving away or poo-pooing the online storage and they were pushing to the evidence.com. Is that model that you folks have in place now, has any of that been mentioned back to y'all from Taser?
Yeah, I'm not aware of what happens in the next upgrade. You know, every upgrade brings a little bit of, uncertainty, so I'm not aware of Taser taking away the offline mode yet. Something to find out.
How are you indexing the images?
How are we indexing the images? Well, again, in our car camera systems, we have already a set of categories that the police officer will assign to it, and those categories, in turn, add the retention policy for it. So, for example, if it's and actually Greg is probably better to answer this question, but if it's a DWI stop, and let's say it's a 2-year retention plan, when it's uploaded from the laptop up to the arbitrator server, he assigns a category to that, such as a DWI stop, and then that gets assigned a retention plan of 2 years. If it's a normal traffic stop, 30 days or
No, I believe it's 30 days on the normal traffic stop.
How do you identify that back to a specific individual or a specific stop?
So during that upload process, arbitrator has a series of metadata that you can add to it, and we discussed what metadata was of value to us. There's 20 fields that you can put in, so you can spend a lot of time putting it in on each video. But what we did is decide on the very specific pieces of metadata. Like, for example, we want to know what officer was involved, and so we put in just a few pieces of that data so that upload process. And you can actually add that metadata in mass. If you've got 4 videos, 5 videos, 10 videos of the same incident, you can add that metadata one time and say add it to all these videos, and so that's when it goes up.
Jeff, I got a question on either your sheriff or your chief. Why does he oppose the body cameras?
I've had more discussions with the police chief, and he was very adamant about his opposition. One thing, there's a lack of standards, which he said he just didn't feel they were ready for day-to-day use. Shannon has on one version of the camera. There's others that are attached to the lapel or to your shirt pocket or this and that and other. Of course, he was playing devil's advocate. He said if it's one wearing on your head or attached to the glasses, he said if I'm a bad guy, I'm gonna knock it off. Done. That's it. He said if it's attached to a permanent spot on your chest, he said if I'm talking with someone and I'm suspicious of them, he said I'm going to approach them with my weapon away from them. So he said you're not going to see the person. It'll be cameras will be pointed over here. He said I'm not going to walk to them straight. I'm going to do that anyway. So that was, those are just a couple of concerns he had. And then we had discussed the amount of data that's going to produce from the IP standpoint. If someone has a public records request, is there a standard on how that's going to be presented back to them? And he was concerned also about the amount of data we may be talking about and how we're going to store and manage that. He's probably going to have a full-time person doing nothing but managing those videos and keeping those logged and recorded. When you're dealing with the courts, is there a standard method for playing that? So he has thought it out, but he's just saying I don't think it's ready.
Great, other comment.
Actually, I was going to ask Greg to speak to that process. I mean, it does seem like when you break down any kind of IT process, there's a lot of steps, but and the process did seem a little cumbersome at first. But I'd like for Greg to speak to that now that we've been in play. We've been in play for about 60 days now.
We rolled out the training for everyone over the series of several days. And just to be blunt and honest with you, there was a lot of bitching and griping all around. It was. That's police officers, right? That's just how they are. With any process.
We have a few of them in here.
With any process, and that's just how it is. And, so initially up front, we caught a lot of, I got a lot of, backdoor side, hey man, this is some crazy stuff, what are we doing? And the first time that I did it, I went through the process, you know, I was kind of open-minded to it, said, well, you know, it's saving us a ton of money, so it's got benefits. So after about the second, I'll even say the third time that I actually recorded a video and uploaded it in the way that the procedures they had laid out, it was super easy. Before you know it, I'm just clicking stuff, and I am not the most computer literate person in the world. I promise you that I'm the least qualified person to be in this room right now, okay? So, well, maybe. But the thing about it is the way we do it, you know, once they record a video on their system, they go to their computer, they download it onto Evidence Sync. From there, they transfer it over, basically upload it into, I'm probably not using the proper terminology, but they upload it into our backend client. And then from that point, they have the ability, and actually our policy requires that they delete it off of Evidence Sync and also off of their C drive, because all that stuff, and I'm you know, upfront and honest with them about it. Hey, that stuff can be traced back to you if you do something hinky, you know, they can find out. So just do what you're supposed to do in that regard. But the process has been very easy. It takes just minutes. We're doing it a couple of different ways too. Lots of times we do it over Wi-Fi. Sometimes we do it over our Verizon 4G air cards and also over hard lines, Ethernet cables. And so far, it's worked out very well with all three ways to upload the video. Obviously, the hard line is a lot faster, but the guys are out there in the field uploading off the 4G air cards, and it doesn't take that long to do it. So they looked at also, I know this may not affect all of y'all, but on average, there's about 30 minutes per 12-hour shift that officers are actually uploading video. So it worked out really fantastically, in my personal opinion, with the process, the way it's uploaded, the way it's stored, and the cost of it. So it's very effective. I don't know if that's probably the answer. Okay.
I'll mention one quick thing. Well, I probably should monopolize this, but we discourage them from doing it over the Verizon air card. They can do it, but I would prefer they do it over Wi-Fi or the hard line so that we know for sure that video gets up there. The slowest part of this is the getting the video off of the camera itself to the laptop itself. That part is slow. And getting it from the laptop up to the server is much faster. Going from the laptop to the backend client server for arbitrary, that's much faster. Well, you don't want to take an officer off the street because he's downloading video, so the police department looked at how their, I would say their high volume users work, like for example, their traffic guys who are making stops, you know, every 6 minutes, you know, somebody's out there pulling somebody over writing a ticket, so they got video after video after video. So the chief actually made a decision to utilize personnel inside the office. Those officers can, at the end of the shift, bring cameras into records management folks that actually are in the office, the constabule personnel, and they download those videos for them. And that's not every officer, but that's the high volume officers out there, so it keeps that officer out on the street. He's not having to worry about it. Other officers are taking maybe 1 or 2 or 3 videos, and then in their downtime, so to speak, when they're not doing something specific, they will set in their car and download it to the laptop, and then that's ready to go up to the back-end client. So they have worked out a process where it doesn't take the officer off the street for very long.
Can you pass over to Courtney? So Courtney is our public records expert. I'm going to walk back to you, and I'm going to assume that there's a question around the security of uploading the video over wireless or air cards. But before we get to that, I want to have Courtney say a few words, and also around the legal requirements from the public records standpoint associated with this video, and how long it has to be kept, etc.
Yeah, so there's sort of 3 pieces of this puzzle that I hope to address briefly. One is the public records aspect of it, which, in case you're not familiar, in North Carolina is fairly broadly written, but then there are exceptions to it, so that makes it all very complicated. So on one level, these body cam videos would definitely be public records, but then according to General Statute 132-1.4, criminal investigations are exempted from that. And so therefore, if these videos are part of a criminal investigation, they would not be considered a public record that's available and accessible to the public. Also, personnel records in North Carolina, there are 12 exceptions to this exception, but basically personnel records are not they're confidential, so they're also something that's not accessible to the public. And so, both from what we found out talking to people here in North Carolina and looking at what's going on in other states, a lot of people realize that these videos oftentimes are going to be used for internal investigations as well as the criminal investigations. So a lot of these are going to fall into one of those two categories. So from the access point, that makes it complicated in the sense that a lot of this is probably not going to be publicly accessible. And so from the beginning, that irritates a lot of people, right? Because some people are saying this is great for transparency, let's put it up on YouTube. And I'm fascinated by the whole Seattle thing, where that came from. That guy made a public records request for all of the videos that had been recorded in the Seattle Police Department. And rather than fight him, they, if you can't beat him, join him, right? So they brought him in as like a 3-month gig to develop this algorithm to blur the images on the videos so they could upload it and not have privacy concerns from those videos that they're uploading. So it's an interesting kind of IT/law enforcement solution they came up with in Seattle. What's going to happen here in North Carolina, it's a little bit hard to predict. I mean, what we have done at the state archives, the policy we have in place is generally a 30-day retention period unless it becomes part of a criminal investigation or part of a personnel investigation. If it becomes one of those other two things, then you follow that retention. But otherwise, we're setting a 30-day retention, because what I found in doing a lot of research on this, there is some variety. The preponderance, it seems to be 30 days, so we felt comfortable with that. But there were some that are much longer. I mean, Shannon already mentioned 5 years. And I'm good enough at math and know just enough about IT to realize that that's going to be very problematic. So I definitely didn't argue for the longer retention for that reason. In terms of things coming down the pike, Shannon mentioned that there's legislation being debated. There are actually 4 bills in the House. One is just a study bill. A couple are suggesting that body-worn cameras would be required, and then they're trying to decide when they would be required, and they each have different exceptions to when they would be required, so that's kind of interesting in and of itself. One suggests that they would have to be retained for 60 days, so that's obviously a different thing than what we have suggested up to this point. And also suggests that those videos could be redacted and disclosed to the public, so that opens up the possibility of the Seattle model. Another one that also lists exceptions says that the videos would be retained for, quote, a reasonable period of time as determined by the law enforcement agency, so that doesn't precisely answer that question. And then another says that the videos may be released, but it adds an interesting little caveat that the person making the request would have to specify the date and fairly closely the time that the event occurred so that it would be easy to find said event. So what's going to happen with all that stuff in the General Assembly, obviously none of us can predict, but that's kind of the state of where things are at this point.
And we actually have a question back here, and I think it ties nicely into what Courtney was talking about.
What I was wanting to know, and it was brought up at the City of Lexington's Police Department, is when these officers approach a home, to enter a home, how is that played into if the resident doesn't want the inside of the home filmed? Like I said, this goes into a sort of all of it together that, you've got some people that just fear the public and don't want their face to be posted in the public. So that was one of the questions that's come up during our concerns. So.
Well, I'll tell you, we looked at that specific issue. And our policy is that once the officer checks on duty, he's got his camera on, it's not recording though, it's just in buffering mode. Okay, so if certain calls, we had a list of multiple calls that you would actually cut your camera on for. However, we were clear it wasn't all inclusive. But we also said that if you have a legal right to be where you are, and especially if it's and if you're conducting some kind of an investigation, you're on a call or whatever, it's part of an investigation, you're there to do that specifically. Now, where we had certain restrictions, more so were actually in, like during bond hearings, inside the jail, those kinds of things, inside a courtroom. We have to cut our cameras off for those kinds of things. And also, if it's a voluntary encounter, as long as the person's not being disrespectful or antagonizing or anything like that, if you know what I'm saying. So we're not running it the entire time, but if we have a legal right to be where we are, and we're in the process of conducting some kind of an investigation, our camera is on outside of the courtroom pretty much. And I'd say that pretty much fits within our abilities and the
So,
law.
just a question for you, following along that, so during traffic stops, you guys are talking about traffic stops, if there's a minor in the vehicle, does that change the nature of the recording?
It hasn't yet, and I know that, we were talking about this I think as late as yesterday, matter of fact, about that, recording juveniles and those kinds of things. So that may be something we end up having to look at some point. But as of right now, because I know some of the SROs were concerned about that as
Right.
well, if you're inside of a school. And I think the initial thought right now is that if it is part of an investigation, they're running it. But I think the SROs are being very, very selective on when they run the video cameras.
Okay.
And very selective. So, to answer the question, I don't have an answer exactly for that question. I think it's, right now, we're kind of doing that, and that may be something that changes, but.
And a question popped up on the screen, I think it was Jeremy, might have texted that question. It said, so the public can't request your cameras to be turned off?
They can request it, but we're most likely not going to do it. If we're conducting, because our policy specifically states that we're to have our camera on.
Right.
Now, there are certain times when we should not. Now, that's during voluntary encounters and also where it runs into a judicial proceeding of some kind. And there's some other things. Obviously, also privacy issues, but a lot of that stuff ties into voluntary encounters. If you're at the hospital, you got to be mindful of HIPAA violations and those kinds of things. So they can request all they want, but what we're saying is if we have a legal right to be where we are and we are conducting an investigation, so we don't run the camera all the time. So if we cut the camera on, it's because we are actually conducting some sort of investigation. I know other departments, they leave them on the entire shift. Now, I don't know if it's more problematic for them than it would be for us, but we're not having any issues with that so far. Nobody's, to my knowledge, no one has said, can you cut your camera off? Because they can ask all they want to, but we'll just specifically say, well, according to our policy, I have a legal right to be where I'm at. I'm conducting an investigation. I've got to leave it on.
Have you had a public records request yet?
For DWIs, but that's it. Yes, we've had some subpoenas for DWIs, but that's it so far.
Okay, so you had subpoenas, not public record requests?
Yes, correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
making sure. Oh,
Probably
just because he's
coming.
closer, I'll come to you, David, I promise.
Are these taking place in dash cams?
The question was about whether it's taking place of the dash cams.
Currently, no. The reason why is because the in-car camera systems, I know they're GPS capable. We're not running that technology right now, but the biggest thing is it's got impact sensors that set the camera off. So in the event the officer is involved in some kind of crash, especially if they're knocked unconscious or, heaven forbid, something worse than that, it's still, the video is still recorded. And so you're going to get something because the officer's not going to be able to manually cut that system on their body in the event of something like that. So right now we're running both systems. Haven't seen any problems with it so far. Not too much complaining about it either, but we are currently doing that.
Let me mention one quick thing about that. I think the body cam, augments the in-car camera in that, especially head mounted like she's wearing there, when an officer, say for example, is going on an emergency call, he has lights running, he's going through an intersection, he slows to clear the intersection. With your head mounted camera, you can actually see the officer on the video turn his head left and right to see if he's actually, as he clears the intersection. The camera in the car shows the officer slowed and shows his speed, but it doesn't show whether or not he actually cleared the intersection. So if there were an incident there, you can go back to that video and see whether or not the officer cleared the intersection.
I'm sorry, I want to add to that as well. We have cameras in our back seat, so in the event that you have an arrestee, if they're banging their head on the partition, which they're prone to do, we can go back and say, well, here's the video of the arrestee banging their head, doing something crazy, yeah. And it wasn't us that did it because we're filming this direction, not behind us. So we're currently using both systems.
David has a question.
Your policy states that you have to, when you go to investigate, you have to record. In that, do you have to let them know that you will be recorded?
No.
And the answer to that is North Carolina is a unilateral consent state. So that means even on a telephone call, as long as one party of the two-party conversation knows that they're being recorded, that that's all that has to be disclosed, versus like Florida's a dual consent state where both parties have to be notified of consent.
This is just a little bit more information I'll give you, just so that I'll get it in, but we've been in play for about 60 days, and we have about 7,000 videos that we've saved, and that's roughly about 20 gigabytes per day. So that gives you an idea of what we're saving so far. We don't really know how much storage we'll need. You can't really do a flat calculation based on that, because you don't know what's going to be retained. I mean, there's videos in there that we're saving right now that will be gone in 30 days, so we don't count that. So I really need a full 1-year cycle, or even more, 18-month cycle, to figure out exactly how much storage we're going to be needing.
Real quick, how many officers do you have?
67.
Is it SD or HD?
We've got 67 total sworn officers. We've got 8 that work a patrol shift, plus we have additional officers usually that are on at that time, traffic, South Main Street Patrol, here SROs. So we have, daytime we have a ton, usually maybe close to 30 working at one time, and then nighttime is usually 8.
The other question was whether it was SD or HD recording, correct? I heard somebody say that.
Okay, so on the Axon program, the sync program on the laptop, you can actually change the video quality from good to better to best or something like that. And it's typically, as it comes to you, it's set in the middle. And it's good enough quality so that you really don't need that high definition quality. That's true. Yeah, we have an opportunity to increase our storage on the Leo dime. That's what that message said there. But we had an officer to crank it up to high quality, and we found that the download time from the camera to the laptop increased significantly, and the size of the video increased significantly. So we did a couple of tests, and we found that the middle quality of the video is adequate. So we stuck with the middle quality.
As far as have you thought about the concerns of the camera quality improving what the officer sees and the admissible information in court? Meaning, let's assume this officer is wearing a camera and something shows up on the camera that they really couldn't see, or because, and then maybe that helps you set the quality of the video or not set the quality of the video, or the choice in the camera that you make or don't make. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm going to give you the philosophical statement from our chief, and I'm not here to speak for the police department, by the way. I'm here to speak on the technical matter of it, but I know I had this conversation with the chief, and Greg may have also. It is the chief's opinion that the camera should reflect what the officer would normally see, and I may not be using the right legal term to describe that, but let's say, for example, if you were to acquire a video camera that would see with infrared, and the officer entered the room and the camera shows something in infrared that the officer's eye, normal human eye, cannot see, that's not a direction that we want to go. We don't want to record, we don't want to submit evidence to the courts that shows something a camera might see but an officer cannot see.
Terry and then Ben.
You mentioned that you discourage officers from downloading video to the wireless carriers network. Verizon's contacted us several times over the past several months about the limited video applications we have that are running over their network, and they're concerned about violating their current state contracts. And so I guess, I know you said you discourage them, but are you monitoring data usage to check that to keep them in balance?
Well, the flow usually comes from the west coast to the east coast, right? And these cell phone providers, data providers, plan providers are probably going to take away at some point in time that unlimited plan. We still have an unlimited plan with Verizon, but that's not the reason I discourage it. The reason I discourage it is because when you drive down South Main Street, you get in front of Arby's, it drops off. If you drive, 600 feet more and it picks back up. So if he's downloading a video during that process, I don't really know what happens to the data in that continuous upload. So I would prefer he sit still somewhere or use something a little more reliable like Wi-Fi or a hardline. That's the only reason I discourage it.
I'll add to that, and we actually just recently sent out a directive that said not to do that. Don't download video off of the air card. So we're doing it off of pretty much hardline Wi-Fi within the police department.
Are there any security reasons that they shouldn't consider doing Wi-Fi uploads?
Well, we have a project that I'm proud of. We could do a whole session on our private setup with Verizon, but we have a private point-to-point setup with Verizon where we give out private IP addresses to our air cards. So it's IPsec over GRE, so it's a tunnel within a tunnel. It's pretty secure. We have an endpoint Cisco routers at our location, and we have an endpoint VPN with Verizon. So, and we have dual redundancy on that. We have 2 internet service providers that provide that if one fails. So from a security standpoint, coming out of that car, the video is no more of a concern to me than is CGIS data moving from point A to point B through that same tunnel.
Just a question from one of the earlier questions. From a quality standpoint, even with the technology being what it is, even with an iPhone right now, if you get a fingerprint on it, and you really won't know until you take a picture and look at it. So is there something in the policy where you're forced to check to make sure the lens is clean, something to that detail, or is it something that you're suggesting that the officers do?
Right, well, according to our policy, the way, it's somewhat general, but what we've instructed them to do at the beginning of every shift, they've got to make sure that their system is working properly, make sure that it's clean, maintained. So it's a kind of a general blanket statement, but we're making sure, when we did the training, we talked to them about, what you need to do for, just maintenance and those kinds of things, and also refer them to the owner's manual, those kinds of things, which they went over. So that should be kind of all-inclusive, I guess, but they're supposed to do that at the beginning of every shift. Again, just like, anything else, who knows whether or not that's actually done, to be honest, just to be perfectly honest, but that's what they're supposed to be doing.
I just smudged this with my finger, and then I licked my finger and also smudged it, and it still looks pretty good to me. I'm sorry, guys, I didn't mean to destroy your camera, but you made me wear it, so.
So again, on the setup here, this is not a realistic reflection of the video quality. What you're seeing here is a Bluetooth connection at Bluetooth speed from 50, 60 feet over to an iPhone. So what you're seeing on the screen here now is not a good representation of your video. Your video that comes from these cameras is very smooth, it's very clear and good quality.
Questions? Oh, yes.
Just wanted to know if you gave it to all uniformed officers or officers on patrol.
Every single member of every sworn member of our police department has gotten one. So from the chief all the way down to the brand new person that was hired a couple weeks ago. Everybody's getting one.
Yes, that includes criminal investigation guys too. Our CID guys have cameras also, so they may adopt a policy at some point in time where they go into a crime scene or something to that effect and use the body camera itself to record evidence.
Do you have any concerns about chain of custody with your process right now?
Well, these guys don't work for me, so I'm not.
He says
he's not concerned. He says he's not concerned. At this point, no, and I think mainly because the reason how they set it up, everything is, especially when you're talking about entering in some of the information by the officers entering their stuff in, it's downloaded. And right now the policy, the way it states is that any, and it was very general as well, but like altercation, duplication, those kinds of things. I don't doubt for 1 minute that anybody that does that's probably going to get fired for doing that kind of thing. It's going to be a very, very stiff penalty. And I told them specifically, this is going to be really bad if you try to do anything at all like that. It could be traced. So I think everyone pretty much understood, whether or not it actually does happen. Who knows? But something always happens with
So I didn't mean to be flippant about that, but I'll tell you some of the details in the background. Each Axon camera, the camera she's wearing right now, has a serial number that serial number is registered with the police officer. The person that is issued that camera is assigned to that camera, so his name's associated with that serial number. That serial number shows up in the file name, in the metadata of the video itself. The file name also contains a sequential number, so if he's recorded, like for example, I don't know what the sequence number on that is, but if it's 147 and she turns it off and turns it back on, the next sequence number should be 148. It also has date and time stamped in that file name metadata. So for example, in the policy, if they were to delete a video, or if they rename the file or something like that, and the captain or lieutenant or sergeant that's reviewing the video sees an arbitrator that he sees sequence number 146, 147, 149, then we need to find out what happened to 148. It may be that he took a 10.90 break at Walmart, left it on in the bathroom. I'm not sure what he did there, but we need to find out what happened to that number, that actual sequence of video. So he is responsible, the officer is responsible for that chain of custody, and they have some control over that. Doing it locally though, I won't try to gloss it over, but doing local stories like this, you do not get the bells and whistles that Taser will offer you when they're giving you the sales pitch. There are a list of more auditing type functions, reviewing type functions, those kind of things that you do get when you push up to the cloud. It's just that we made a decision to save the money and forego that additional auditing.
And just for a point of clarification, when I was talking to Brian Dickerson, I'm gonna say his name because he's not here. He is our CJIS expert for the state of North Carolina. He works for the Department of Justice. Any CJIS questions you have, send to him. His email address is bdickerson@ncdoj.gov. But I asked him about this, and he and I had a long conversation, and he told me that right now they estimate that we have 18,880 law enforcement officers across the state of North Carolina. And using the model of taserevidence.com, $99 per officer per month, assuming no discounts, that the cost to the taxpayer, assuming we pay for everybody out of the big bucket, would be $22.49 million a year. A year. So that's just the numbers that he worked out in his head of that $99. I'm sure maybe you can get it cheaper. I don't know. Is anybody using that service, evidence.com? And what are you guys paying? I'm sure if you had.
It's not that much, we got to educate.
Oh, so you got an educational discount in Pitt County, or for Pitt Community College. Are you guys doing it locally? So Leslie in New Hanover is doing it locally? Was more effective cost-wise that way?
Yes, at least in the short term.
At least in the short term?
Shannon, that would be the first year, right?
I don't know. That's just the number he gave me. I didn't ask a whole lot of questions. Well, and I think that's the question for Courtney. How long do we have to retain the history of that? And I think the answer was 30 days is what they're working on right now. 60 days is what one of the bills in the House currently states. It also depends on if it's actually part of the case file, right? If it's a felony, then you've got to keep it through all appeals are exhausted, right? Which is forever. I mean, no, seriously, in a felony case, all appeals exhausted. I mean, you're talking 20 plus years typically for those kinds of issues. Courtney, do you know in the Seattle case where they're putting it out on YouTube and blurring the faces, are they keeping a copy of that somewhere else as well for the case file purposes? Because that's not an original record that doesn't have a chain of custody associated with it, and I would assume it's not admissible in court.
Yeah, my understanding is that they are keeping the original, and here in North Carolina, the legislation that is suggesting that as a possibility for us does specifically state that the original has to be kept. So on the one hand, it's providing that public access piece, but on the other hand, it then means you're keeping two versions of this, which creates more of a storage problem.
And there is a piece of legislation that I read this morning that states that the public will be allowed to request videos from body cams as part of the public record. I think that was House Bill, which one is that? I don't know if it's 395.
395 is the one that is requiring the body cams, has the 7 exceptions for when they would be turned off, says they may be redacted and disclosed and retained for 60 days. So then if it's part of the personnel file, then likely it's not gonna fall in under one of the 12 things that is public under the personnel file, so therefore it would be confidential.
And I think Greg had a great point about that, and so he sort of mentioned the 3 reasons that they did it, and I promise I'll come over to you in just 2 seconds. He said that it's for officer, look, you can see my notes, officer accountability in terms of performance reviews, et cetera, citizen or behavioral change of the citizen when they realize that they're being recorded. Maybe IT people should wear these. Right? But then also social accountability for evidence of events like we've seen transpiring in the media. Have you noticed changes in officer behavior, citizen behavior, societal behavior? Specifics?
Absolutely. I mean, it's one good thing about it. I think I forget who had asked about, do we disclose that we're actually recording people? We don't have to disclose that, but that's one of the methods that we use to change people's attitudes and the way they interact with us. Is lots of times we'll disclose that, hey, just letting you know I'm recording this interaction. That does totally change it. Officers as well. I mean, I'm not going to be naive about it. It truly does. But I think when you're talking about changing officers' behavior, a lot of it may be just the general interaction. And I'm not saying anything criminally or anything like that, but just a basic interaction between citizens and officers, I think it absolutely does change.
Have you had any citizens say, okay, well then I'm going to record from my standpoint of the interaction with the officer?
I have not heard that within our department, but I have seen that at other departments. I know that's happened.
I mean, that's what I would do probably.
Yeah, absolutely. It's on YouTube.
If the officers have the latitude to turn their camera on and off, if it's a reportable offense that they're investigating, and they just don't do it, they don't turn it on, is there a thought that the court is going to say, I have seen cases come through here, you've got video for every case, you don't have any for this, and the court's going to kick it?
Right. Well, and we try to offset that by, there are instances too where you'll be on a call and either a supervisor or someone from Vice Narcotics can say, hey, I need you to cut your camera off. And, the supervisor or even the person with Vice Narcotics, whoever it is that does that, has to document, in a report. You have to do an incident report that documents the fact that you told them to cut it off and the reasons behind that, why it was done. So I think there's still some transparency there, even though you're losing video, but it has to be a specific reason. It can't just be, hey, cut your camera off on and just kind of BS with you a little bit. I mean, it has to be something pretty significant, and that's got to be documented. So whether it's documented on the video or documented in the incident report, and again, I think we want to get all of the interaction on video. But a lot of the cutting your camera off stuff is going to be for probably procedural or administrative purposes.
It's not going to go from an unreportable interaction to a reportable interaction.
It can, you're right.
And if that happens, you don't have any video, and I just wonder if the court is going to get used to having this video evidence, and then you come in with a case and you don't have it, and say, well, you don't have it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's possible.
They use it as a threat, so to speak.
Right, and that's possible, but one of the things we're telling everybody, there's a 30-second buffering time. So in that 30 seconds, you should, and a lot of it's common sense. If you think it's starting to go south, go ahead and activate it, cut it on, get it rolling, and so that's recording everything. So, and there's you're right. You could be, but for that matter, I could be in a restaurant somewhere, and then somebody comes and starts shooting. And by that point, am I going to think about clicking that on?
I don't want you to wait.
Right. I'll tell you I won't. But, so there's always exceptions. But for the most part, I don't think it would be too problematic as long as everybody uses common sense with it.
And I think that's a really good question. I actually wrote that question that I had sent the panelists in terms of what kind of legal support are we considering from a law enforcement attorneys association or even just your municipal and county attorneys thinking about how do I go legally defend the time that they forgot to turn it on, right? Because I think we will need that type of legal support. And Randy actually I tried to show it, but this is entirely too hard for me to bring something up. Tell me what that app is.
No, it was just released, and it was to Shannon's point about the reverse of the citizen recording. The ACLU for North Carolina just released a mobile justice application for smartphones for the citizen aspect of it. And I thought it was interesting from the technology. They have a feature for a witness that if you have multiple devices in a room, if one person starts recording, you'll actually notify within a radius of your GPS coordinates. So just an interesting cat and mouse, from citizen versus officer.
And I'll tell you too, from our standpoint, we welcome it. If you want a video, any kind of interaction, then by all means do that. We as a department don't have any issues or problems with it, so it just helps supplement basically our investigation.
We have 4 minutes, Jeremy.
Standing between you and prizes.
You know, in Winston-Salem, it was just on Fox 8, they had a gentleman, that the lieutenant had an not altercation, but it was a 20-minute video of this guy standing out there filming outside of the Winston-Salem Police Department. And it hit pretty big, and go ahead, Greg.
Just as an FYI, that guy lives in Kernersville.
He's one of y'all's, that's what you're saying? Yeah, I mean, I do think that you'll probably see the media engage in some very interesting behaviors as a result of both sides reporting. I'm not sure that the officers will always get a fair shake, right? It's much more interesting to see video by citizenry. Courtney, do you have something?
Well, as my parting advice, I want to emphasize something I heard repeatedly from the two gentlemen to my right, which is have a policy. And I would recommend have the law enforcement people involved, have the IT people involved, and have your legal people involved in drawing up that policy. And therefore, if there are questions about what's happening, you can point to that policy, and that's going to offer some protection to all those people involved.
I don't know who you are, but who are you? You ask really good questions. All right, well, welcome. So the custodian of the data, that's a great question.
That is an interesting question. I mean, I would be interested in just a moment to get the IT perspective. I would assume it's going to be law enforcement, but I don't know if you who have boots on the ground have a different idea.
In North Carolina law states the custodian of the record is the sender or receiver of said record or the department head governing that department, if I'm remembering my North Carolina law for General Statute 132 correctly. So who is the custodian of the record? Is it the police chief? Is it the records manager for y'all's video? Yes, it's not IT. Let me quote Fred Bluestein. IT is not the custodian of the record for anything but IT records.
Ultimately, it is the police chief, or the town clerk, depending on
Yeah.
where it lives, but.
It's exactly like any other record, right? So don't let the police department make you become the custodian of the record. Greg, are you guys willing to share like your policy, how y'all laid that out? Awesome. Greg or Greg?
No, I was just gonna say, y'all have my telephone number now, so if you want to call me, I'm happy to share anything with you. I also have a report from a research group that, if it's a public document, I'll share that with you too. And it's a survey done in 2013, and it lays all this stuff out. It's a very good document. The chief shared it with me, and if I can, I'll share that with you, but just drop me an email if you're interested in that. Or text.
All right, apparently it's time for prizes. Can we thank our panelists?